Yes, Geordies, welcome back to another episode. The first thing I want to say is always, I hope everyone's well. And boy, is it getting cold now. Me little mangoes are getting hot. What? What have I just said? I do apologise about that. You don't need to know that. But look, we've just drew 0-0 away to Bournemouth. And looking back now, I'm happy with the point. Although the performance wasn't great, I thought defensively we were excellent once again. So we've got an interesting video lined up today because I want to spread a little bit more positivity, have some Lewis Miley loving just for 5 minutes. And then we're going to talk about how our positive transfer window is now showing up. And then I want to reflect on the 5 opening Premier League games. I'm not going to speak about them individually, but as a whole, I'm going to look at the positives and the negative. And then I want to talk about why Eddie Howe will get us firing for goals again. Now that I've got your attention, the very first thing I want to do is I need some help because I can't win in this situation. If I call him Nick Voldemurder, I get told it's wrong. If I call him Nick Voldemade, I get told it's wrong. Somebody help us, please. I've tried both ways, and both ways I'm getting told I'm saying it wrong. So I want you guys to tell us the correct pronunciation in the comments. Give this mango a little bit of help, please. I don't mind you criticizing us. In fact, I find it quite funny. I like this little banter we can have. But one guy saying one thing and another guy saying another thing, and I just don't know what to believe. But you know what, guys? Sometimes I get things right. Sometimes I'm just in the flow of the video and it comes out wrong, and I honestly apologize. Don't take it to heart. I'm sorry. I'm just a lad trying to speak about Newcastle United. But there is one place I want to start. And I can't believe I've got to do this because I actually respect our fan base. But Lewis Miley put a post out there just appreciating his 50th appearance for his boyhood club. You would think that with this post, he would get a lot of love in. A lot of people would say congratulations. But it got to a point that he had to turn off the comments because he was getting so much abuse. Look, I've said this from day one. Every single person watching these videos or every single Newcastle United fan is entitled to their opinion. And their opinion should be respected because opinions on facts. You're entitled to your opinion. If you think Lewis Miley was terrible yesterday, that's your opinion. I don't believe he was. Was he excellent? No, he wasn't, but he wasn't bad. But what are we doing here? Seriously? He's a 19-year-old boy and there was mitigating circumstances why he didn't have the platform to perform yesterday. But aside from that, he's one of our own. If anything, we should be encouraging the guy, not putting him down. Just 4 days ago, we were getting told that we were the best fans in the world from Barca fans. And then 4 days later, we're abusing one of our own. Like, how old are we? Seriously. So I just want to make a few points. Was it a dazzling performance from the 19-year-old who was starting his first game since the 2nd of March, which was a cup game against Brighton? No, it wasn't dazzling, but he wasn't poor either. Now, I know people will argue that he was too safe, but I honestly put that down to how we set up rather than his instincts. What do we notice from Lewis Miley since he's come into the team, aside from yesterday? He always wants to play forwards. Yesterday he was playing side to side and backwards, but I put that down to the system because it limited options moving forward. Think about it. Usually when we opt in or other teams opt with the back three, they deploy 2 number 10s. That gives them more options and a bigger final third threat. We didn't play with 2 number 10s yesterday. We played with pretty much a flat midfield 4 or 3 if you want to qualify Jacob Murphy as a forward. We were so focused on our defensive shape yesterday. When we did look to break, we didn't have the options to break through the lines. And how often have I said this? 2 things killing football: pace and movement. Pace for obvious reasons, and movement because movement dictates the pass the majority of the time. So when somebody's in possession, if he's got good movement around him, the movement of the runner dictates where he plays that ball. If you don't have that movement, you're really restricted to what you can do in possession. And then another point I want to make, with all the changes, even a change in formation, the lack of game time for Lewis Miley, psychologically was probably unwilling to take as much of a risk due to the fear of losing the game for his team. He's 19. Whether you think he's good enough or not, nobody deserves criticism after a 0-0 draw away to Bournemouth. My last thing I want to say on this, please just back the lad. And if you think about that game against Bournemouth yesterday, did any of our forward options perform? Probably not. So Lewis Miley, us in the Fruit Basket family all love you. That's the only thing I want to say on Lewis Miley. But I want to get into this video because there is a couple of things I want to talk about, and that is where we are at the moment in terms of defensively, offensively, and where we are in the Premier League. Because after 5 games, we're sit with 6 points, which doesn't look too pleasing. However, there is mitigating factors for our start of the season. I don't actually think we've had a bad start. Think of our record at Villa Park. It is terrible. We didn't get beat. Think of our record at Bournemouth. It's terrible. we didn't get beat. We went to Leeds without a striker, Anthony Gordon missing, and still didn't get beat. We played the majority of the game against Liverpool with 10 men, and we were unlucky not to win that game. So there is a lot of positives to take away from the season so far. But the first thing I want to do is strip it back all the way to the summer, because what did I consistently say throughout the summer window? We were going to have a positive end of the window. When you see it on paper, we've absolutely had a positive end of the window. What was needed this summer? We needed a right winger. We brought in Anthony Elanga. We needed a younger goalkeeper. We brought in Aaron Ramsdale, albeit he's on loan. We brought in Antonio Cordero. He's one for the future, as well as Park, which I missed off on there. We needed more depth at the right centre-back position. We brought in Malik Chow. And we've seen last night that he's more than capable of competing in the Premier League. We needed more depth in midfield. We brought in Jacob Ramsey. Me, personally, I still think we need more in midfield. And then as strikers, we brought in Johan Wissa and Nick Waltermurder? I don't know. I'm sorry, guys. Who I personally think is a better duo than our old number 14 in Callum Wilson. So the one thing that was missing from our transfer window, in my opinion, was more depth in midfield and a creative midfielder. Now, you look at all the circumstances surrounding our transfer window. No CEO, no sporting director. We had a drama queen that made it all about him. So despite all that, I actually think we had a good window. And it's starting to show on the football pitch, because Malik Chow and Sven Botman look two quality centre-backs we can now build a team around in the future. Fabian Shaw and Dan Burn aren't getting any younger. Fabian Shaw's out of contract next summer. Dan Burn's got an additional year. But over the next 2 seasons, we will see them eased out the team. But the pleasing thing is we've already got a stabilised pairing that are ready to come in. That's if Sven Botman can stay fit, hopefully. And then we've got Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall, who have both proven they can cope with the physicality and the pace of the Premier League. So it's really pleasing to know we've already got a setback for. And we all know what a solid defence can do. It makes you not lose games. If you can't win the game, make sure you don't lose a game. So a solid defence is the foundations that you build a success from. And this is what I'm starting to see. Because personally, I believe that a solid backline just spreads confidence across the squad. Attackers, midfielders will then begin to take more of a risk. You can throw it as that Bournemouth were poor themselves. I actually do believe they were. But I think part of that was us nullifying any space, time, or their rhythm. So a stable backline allows midfielders and attackers to operate with a degree of freedom and creativity. And I think this is the balance Eddie Howe needs to find. So let's talk about the positives of these opening 5 games. And undoubtedly the biggest positive, and this is something I've said consistently throughout the summer and any match previews, our defensive shape is the best in the Premier League, and that's now starting to show in the statistics. We've had the most clean sheets, and 3 of those have been away from home. We've had 4 clean sheets in 5 games. But if you look at the context of the game, we went to Aston Villa, we drew 0-0 without a striker. We were the better team. We got beat 3-2 against Liverpool. We played the majority of the game with 10 men. Liverpool scored with the last kick of the game. We went to Leeds with no out-and-out striker, with Anthony Gordon suspended as well. We beat Wolves 1-0. It was our striker's debut. And we drew away to Bournemouth 0-0. There was plenty of changes in personnel and system. Now, even the underlying numbers are terrific. We currently sit top for the best XG against with 2.1. So we're not giving up many chances at all. We're only giving up 2.1 chances per 90. That's better than Arsenal, Liverpool, United, Chelsea, Tottenham, whoever you want to throw it is. Every single other Premier League team. I mean, Arsenal are giving up 3.3, and they're getting lots of credit for their defensive solidity. So the way Eddie Howe has coached his team to be defensively is exceptional, and he needs a lot of credit for it. Even our pressing triggers and our rest defense is one of the smartest in the Premier League. And I've said this before, I'm not just looking back in hindsight and saying this. So there's a lot of positives to take out, because the fundamentals and the structures are there to build on. So I genuinely think there's a lot of positives to take from this season so far. Just think about it. We lost 20 goals with our striker leaving. We tried to replace that, but then he gets injured straight away. Then you've got the Anthony Gordon, who brings a little bit of spark in that final third, getting suspended for 3 games. Then you're also trying to integrate a right winger who still hasn't really found his feet, as well as a striker. That means you've got to play in a slightly different way to get the best out of them. So there's a lot of mitigating factors why we aren't free flowing and scoring. But I want to talk about us offensively now, because let's be objective in our views, and this is nothing against Eddie Howe. In fact, before the Bournemouth game, I made a video literally saying Eddie Howe is pound for pound the best manager in the league, and I still believe that. I honestly believe Eddie Howe is a terrific football manager and terrific football coach. The players he's improved has been exceptional, and I've got no doubt he will get this team clicking. But I did say once we made our signings, there would be some teething problems. We're starting to see that a little bit, But the beauty about Eddie Howe, he doesn't shy away from that. Because what makes me think that we've got a good manager on our hands, one, he always takes accountability, and two, you can already visualize where the problems are. So what I mean by that, did anybody listen to his post-match interview? He literally said, we need more runners and we need to tweak a little bit because we've got two different profiles of strikers. And he's absolutely spot on. But the first thing I want to make clear, I 100% agree with rotation. I don't mind them rotating players. I think it's important. I think it's very much needed. We've seen it in our last Champions League campaign. We couldn't afford to rotate players and the players pretty much burned out. So the importance of rotating players is massive. The importance of squad depth is massive. I literally spent a whole summer talking about squad depth and the importance of it. So why would I sit here now and say I don't want him to rotate? I think he was right to rotate against Bournemouth, but I wouldn't have made so many rotations. Considering we had Bradford midweek, what personally I would have done is brought in Miley, but kept in either Joe Linton or Bruno. But I understand Eddie Howe's point of view on why he done it. And in fact, my preview towards Bournemouth, I literally said, bring in Lewis Hall, bring in Malik Chow, bring in Sven Botman. I even started Jacob Murphy over Alanga. So I wanted rotation in this game. So that's not me criticism. I just think sometimes when you're bringing in players that are lacking confidence and don't have much game time themselves and are still trying to find their own rhythm, putting them in a squad that's quite stabilized or with more stabilized players is easier. That's the only point I was trying to make. Does that make sense, guys? Right, but let's get back to our offensive stats, because although we haven't conceded away from home, we haven't scored away from home either, and we've only scored 3 goals in 5 games. So I'll say it again, personally I wouldn't have opted for a back 5, but I understand why Eddie Howe did, because if you notice, we'll only go to a back 5 the majority of the time when Joe Linton's out the side. Not all the time, but Joe Linton doesn't play when we play back 5. And I think he does that to compensate for the lack of physical presence that Joe Linton brings. And he does that by compacting the midfield. So that's my point I was trying to make. However, we look at our offensive stats. We've scored 0 goals in 3 away games. So although we've not conceded, we haven't scored either, which can be seen as a positive because at least we're not getting beat. A point is better than nothing. But we've scored 3 goals all season. But it's underlying numbers that stand out to me. We're ranked 15th for XG this season. Only Sunderland, Wolves, Leeds, Burnley and Aston Villa are below us. Considering we've got an XG of 4.6 and only scored 3 goals, we've underperformed in our XG. And on top of that, we've only had 13 shots on target all season. Then on top of that, we're ranked 13th for expected assists. So yeah, our creativity is not there at the minute. However, I do like what Eddie Howe had to say in his post-match interview, which makes me less worried. When a manager acknowledges what he needs to do, eventually it will happen. Do you know what it reminded me of? When Eric Ten Hag was in charge of Manchester United, remember how deluded his post-match interviews used to be? He used to sit there and be like, yeah, we were good today, we created loads of chances, we were good, we're just unlucky, when in reality they got absolutely battered. But Eddie Howe understands what to do. If you listen and look at his post-match interview, he sits there and he says, I know what we need to do, we need to get more runners off him. Slightly different to when we had our old striker, which is entirely right. So I'll bring up what he had to say now. I won't read it all out for you, but pretty much he's speaking about the difference of our old striker and Nick Waldemir. He goes on to say, we just need to know and get used to this style. He went on to say, I'm hopeful we're evolving into a different team, hopefully a better team. That is the plan, but it takes a little bit of time. Then he goes on to say, all centre forwards to a degree rely on service, which he's right. But the most important part of this whole post-match interview, he acknowledges how to improve. So eventually, with more training, it will get better, guys. So I'm very confident that Eddie Howe will get us free flowing and scoring. If Eddie Howe had been sitting there saying, we were great today, we created loads of chances, we opened up Bournemouth, I'd be sitting there being like, there's a problem. But the fact that he's not, and he can acknowledge what we need to do, just makes me feel comfortable. I don't know about you guys, let me know in the comments, but there is even more mitigating factors why we're not really creating much, because Anthony Gordon is missing. He'll give us more of a threat in that final third. Jacob Ramsey will add more dynamism from midfield. Then the return of Wissa will add more of a poacher's instinct. Now, I've already done a video on Nick Waldemir and Wissa and how they can play together. If you want to watch it, I will link it at the end. But I actually think those skill sets, if used correctly, could really complement each other. But I did say there would be a little bit of teething problems because Nick Waldemir is different to our old striker, we do have to tactically tweak things slightly. And if I use this Bournemouth game as an example, our old number 14 was a mover. He had elite movement. He can thrive in final third isolation because he has the pace to run in behind himself. Waldemade is more of a hybrid forward, wants to drop deep, excellent, elite at linking up play, but he needs pace and runners around him. Two things killing football: pace and movement. You don't get it from your striker, you need to get it from elsewhere. So let's talk about that system against Bournemouth. And it's difficult for me to talk about this without visually showing you. If I could show you on a football pitch or a tactics board, it would be so much easier. But usually when you set up in a back five, you operate with two number 10s. Man United do it, Palace do it, Wolves do it. A lot of teams operate with two number 10s. And the reason they do that is so their striker doesn't get isolated. And the reason you do that is so you actually have a threat in the final third. The wing backs provide the width, and the two number 10s can operate in the half spaces. What does that do? It creates passing lanes for your defenders and your midfielders, so then they have more than one option in that final third. What else does that do? It forces the opposition to step out. That opens gaps for runners, and it also allows you to create overloads in the attacking zone, which causes the opposition problem. Now, not all teams with the back five set up with two number 10s, but what they do is give a degree of freedom to midfielders or their wide players. Remember how I spoke about in simplistic terms, a lot of teams defend with 5, attack with 5. Think about what we were doing yesterday. We pretty much played with a midfield 3. If you want to include Jacob Murphy, you can do so, midfield 4. We played with Lewis Hall and Tino Livramento dropping into the back 5. Think about that logically in your head. Just think about how it positions on a pitch. You're literally defending with 8 because you've got your midfield 3, then you've got your back 5. What teams usually do when they've got a back 3 is they've got a double pivot in front of a back 3. Their wing backs will push up high. So in the final third, they've got 2 wing backs, 2 number 10s and a striker. Defensively, they've got 3 centre backs and 2 midfielders. There's your 5-on-5. Does that make sense? We didn't have that 5 in the attacking zones yesterday. So when our midfielders were picking up the ball, when Miley was picking up the ball, he had one option, and that was to play to Nick Waldemade. The other options were to play side or backwards. That's the point I'm making. So if Eddie Howe plays with the back 3, has to give more of a degree of freedom. And if you don't believe us, go and have a look at his heat map from yesterday. Most of his interventions, his actions on the ball came in his own half. That tells you something. He's meant to be our midfielder to support attacks. That tells you that Nick Waldemade was isolated, and that's why we had 0 shots and a 0 XG in that second half. So it's not criticism of Eddie Howe, because going with the back 3 in that game isn't the wrong thing to do. It's just giving your bodies or your players a little bit of degree of freedom. So I'll say it again, playing with Nick Waldemade as your striker in a back 3, it's vital you get bodies in advanced areas. When you're playing your 4-3-3, you've got Anthony Elanga and Anthony Gordon supporting them. So again, I'll say it again, this isn't a critique Eddie Howe, because I personally think he's the best pound for pound manager in the Premier League, and things can be a lot worse. Look at what Aston Villa are doing at the minute. So things can be a lot worse. We're not conceding goals. That's a massive positive. And eventually, once our forwards come back, get some game time, get some rhythm, we will start scoring goals. And I'm going to say it, had we had Anthony Gordon, Wissa against Bournemouth yesterday, I don't think he sets up in the back 5. And also, I think we win that game. And if we had Wissa against Aston Villa, Leeds, maybe even Liverpool, we win those games. Actually, it's hard to say that because Wissa's never kicked a ball for us, so we don't actually know what we're missing. I know we've seen him play at Brentford. We've never seen him with a black and white shirt on. It might take a little bit of games to get him up to speed. So although it might look like on paper we're going through a little bit of a bad patch, we're not losing games, guys. We're still picking up points. That's a massive positive. But look, tomorrow I'm going to do a preview for Bradford. All that reminds is I've got a question to ask for you all. I enjoy doing my match previews, just as me with a camera, my thoughts. I enjoy that. But would you like to see, for some important games, me getting somebody on my channel from that team and doing a preview? So for example, Arsenal on the weekend. Should I try and get an Arsenal fan on the channel? They'll probably take one look at me channel, take one look at me followers and say, nah, you're all right. But I can try. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the below. But I just think a little bit more tweaks as the season goes on and develops. We will start getting into our flow. But again, I want to hear your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, away the lads.